Let's welcome in our co-hosts on this wonderful Wednesday, the Admiral Bill Stubblefield. Billy.
Good morning, Rob. It's a sweater day, and Maria was her lovely, colorful sweater. It's cold out there.
As yesterday was as well.
It was, yeah.
But if you haven't cut the grass yet, better do it today, because there's lots of rain the next few days, as we say good morning to Maria Lawrenson.
Good morning. Good morning. And Monday was a sweater day as well. I was in D.C. with the chamber. It was rainy, cold, miserable, but we had really good meetings. But stood out in the rain for a while.
With a protest sign?
No.
Everybody protests in Washington.
I know. No, we were waiting in line to get to the Capitol Visitor Center, which opened at 9 a.m., and we had two tour guides from Senator Capito's office who were meeting us, and we got there well before 9 o'clock, but they were not opening the doors despite the temperature, what have you. And then security is much the same as it is at an airport. I had boots on. They made me take my shoes off, watches, anything metal. It was very interesting. So anyway.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here.
It was a good day. It was a good day, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Our guest in our first segment is the former Berkeley County Democratic Party chairman, Aneesh Sompalli, and at the time, frequent contributor to the program as well. Aneesh, good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, good morning, Rob. Good morning, Bill, Maria. It's so good to talk to you all this morning. And come on down to Houston. It's been 85 and sunny pretty much every day, so no sweaters in Houston for us.
But I understand you're never in Houston, Aneesh. You're always traveling somewhere.
I'm in Cincinnati right now, and it is very cold. So
I was going to say, because Houston, would it be like 3 a.m. or I screw up the time
only 1
frames.
hour.
Okay, 1 hour.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're actually in the sweet spot for sports. I know Rob will appreciate that. I feel like Central Time, now that I live there, is, you don't have to go to sleep at midnight for football games. It seems like everything is on at the right time. So I'm slowly turning into a Central Time Zone advocate.
I've spent a couple weeks on the West Coast here and there, and it is wonderful to have Monday Night Football be on at dinner time and pretty much, over before bedtime. It just changes your entire perspective on the day.
Indeed.
And especially March Madness Monday, the playoffs started here around 9 o'clock, before 9.
Yeah.
Yeah. West Coast folks benefited, but not us East Coast folks.
Aneesh, I thought of you the other day at my dentist appointment. This is, you're probably going, how did you think of me at your dentist appointment? The lady behind the front desk was wearing a Buffalo Bills jersey.
Wow, that's amazing. I thought you were going to say that I'm such a pain in your side that it reminded you as you were getting a tooth extracted or something. So that's awesome. I mean, I see a lot of Bills fans everywhere. I think now that we're somewhat relevant in the conversation for the AFC every year, that people are coming out of hiding and are a little bit more happy to fly that flag. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, I thought of you, and I thought that's pretty cool. You don't see somebody in Frederick, Maryland wearing a Bills jersey every day, so I thought that was pretty neat. Let's talk a little politics with you, Aneesh, here as we get going along as the former county party chairman a few years back. This is certainly an interesting time for Democrats. I saw about a week ago the approval rating for the Democratic Party was 25%. Not seen it in the last week or so. I suspect it might have gone up as the stock market has gone down. But I did see that Donald Trump's approval rating had dropped to 43% from 50% over the last week since this tariff situation kicked in. And then a note that the last time his ratings were this low, at 42% in his first term, the Democrats gained 42 seats in the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. I think that 42 number is correct. It's right around that number as well. What do you make of the state of the Democratic Party on a national basis right now, Aneesh? And what do you think Democrats need to do as the next big midterm election comes up?
Yeah, that's a really, really multifaceted. I think there's a multifaceted answer there, Rob. But in short, I think that the approval rating that you had mentioned was an unsurprising number. When you ask the majority of Democratic Party voters. I felt like on the heels of the Biden administration, how the whole swap happened with Biden and then Kamala, it just felt very, like it was a forced decision, for Democrats to get behind. And I think that now there's not yet a clear person, for the party from my perspective, as far as who's going to lead the party, here in the future. Although, people are throwing out names like Cory Booker, I've heard AOC, there's all kinds of names and speculation. But I think that where the Democrats benefit right now is that there's a lot of people energy, as we're seeing the economy, and the stock market specifically start to tank with these, sledgehammer-like tariffs that have been put across the global economy. That is, Democrats have to lean into that. They have to lean into their voters, the people that are protesting. Some people are not even Democrats that are out there protesting because, we're talking about people's retirements. We're talking about, like, how many people are at that retirement age today that are looking at a 20% haircut in their portfolios and are not sure if they can retire this year. Are they going to have to wait another year before, making decisions like that? So I think Democrats need to lean into that, and you can't really go much more low than 28%. So I think that in any election, when you're the incumbent party, it is really hard to hold on to all your seats in the midterm. And I think with the way that things are shaping up right now in the economy, that Democrats are going to benefit from that in 2026. And we should see a lot of seats flip, especially in those purple districts that are scattered across throughout the country.
Bill?
Yeah, good morning, Aneesh. You mentioned energy, but what I see from the Democratic side now, it's negative energy. You're talking about the Trump tariffs and Trump deportation, all of that. What is missing in that, and Tim Walz mentioned it when he was interviewed a couple of weeks ago, is the Democrats have lost their brand. The Democratic Party is not universally described as anything. There's the Bernie Sanders AOC wing. There's a more moderate wing. I know you say we benefit from a large tent. That's somewhat true, but you've got to have a brand, and I think the Democrats have lost that brand.
Yeah, I am inclined to agree with you, Bill. I think that that's the biggest challenge of whoever emerges in it'll probably be within the next year, really. Whoever emerges is going to have the tough task of trying to reset, what are those values that the Democratic Party stands behind that, we can still include, everybody that wants to be a part of that tent, but it can't be so, it can't be so back and forth. And the Republican Party went through its own reckoning, with the Tea Party and, how that all started back in 2010 to where it is today, right? Now, a lot of the populist right is who runs the show for the Republican Party. And so, I think the Democrats have that reckoning moment that hasn't happened quite yet. And so we are in like this purgatory of like, what is our identity? Who are we? How can we speak to voters? I think that, when we're talking about midterms, though, a lot of it is when you're the party playing defense, it's a lot harder to hold on to your seats than, a party that's running offense. And there's not one person at the top of the ticket. You're talking about individual House seats, some Senate seats that they're going to speak to voters in their districts and their states and talk about issues that are specific to those areas. And the overshadowing message when you're playing offense is that you've got this president who is the face of the Republican Party currently. And so I think that's the strategy for 26. I think I agree with you. Still remains to be seen what will happen in 28 and who the leading candidate will be.
And one other thing before I turn it over to Maria, is you mentioned the Republican Party. My sense is the Republican Party does not necessarily have a brand either. They have a very charismatic leader. If Trump was not in the picture, I think you have two parties both struggling to identify with the populace.
Agreed.
Maria.
Agreed.
Good morning, Aneesh. Good to see you on the screen. So I don't know if you have continued to watch West Virginia politics at all. It's been sort of interesting session of the legislature this year. Obviously super. You should say super twice. Super majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. Yet there seems to be, I don't want to say cracks in the veneer, but
it's factions. It's not cracks. It's full factions.
Factions, that kind of thing. Are you paying any attention? Have you talked to anybody about the state of the Democratic Party in West Virginia? Is there any chance of any type of comeback, or are we in the same space for the next 4, 6, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, that's a good question, Maria. I have been watching, a little bit here and there. I don't know if all the listeners know. I mean, we have a baby boy who's a year and a half who takes a lot of my time now when I'm not traveling for work. And so, getting the chance to catch up on the news that's happening in my home state, I try. I'm not as well versed as I used to be on things, but I mean, I know that the local Democratic Party is, having a bit of a resurgence. I've talked to a couple of them, just in passing, hey, how's it going? And they are trying to, re-energize the party there. And I know that there's rallies held around in Charlestown, Martinsburg, more so recently, that, trying to get people out to, protest some of the things that are happening in the current administration and what's happening at the state level. I think the issue in West Virginia that I see, and I don't have a prescription for it, but it's we're a state that is economically not diversified well. We have, I think, plenty of opportunities to drive that, but we, in the spirit of playing politics, we focus on issues that have little to no relevance, and they are cultural issues that are wedge issues to drive people against each other and, have people at each other's throats. That when you're someone that's, looking at moving to a state, moving your business to a state, you look at those things, you're like, do I really want to be in that kind of environment? Is that what's going to be good for my business? I like to think not. I mean, I think that there are issues when things are working really well that we can discuss, economically, I should say, that we can discuss, and, we can either come to a consensus or there's going to be disagreement. I just don't know that now is the right time for West Virginia to really be, pouring all this political capital and time into, solving issues that I think are such like fringe issues, but they seem to rile up the bases on either side, to be at each other's throats constantly. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the future will be. I think that anytime a state swings that far in one direction for, with a party, it does take time to unwind that. And I think as we start to see some of the factionalism form within the Republican Party in the state, that, once like things are not looking good for the Republican Party nationally, you might see some of those things start to swing back in the state like West Virginia.
We're talking with Aneesh Sompalli, former Berkeley County Democratic Party chair. Aneesh, it's kind of a fascinating dynamic that has developed under the Trump presidency, and it has to do with the coalition of voters that he has built in his base and the actions that he's taking as president that solidify that put the future of the Democratic Party and explain its present condition, I think, pretty clearly. And follow me on this one. So for the longest time, and my father was a Teamster, and my grandfather was a steelworker, so that's two pretty powerful unions right there. I don't know that there are two more powerful unions from those days than those two. And it was all about labor and union and manufacturing and job protection. And the Democratic Party, courtesy of the EPA, and follow me on this one, I'm not way out on the right fringe trying to abolish the EPA. But through many regulatory decisions, chased a lot of that manufacturing away. Not solely and exclusively. There was a lot that went into that, but it was part of it. And even the Trump tariffs, you can make the case that says he's trying to bring manufacturing back to the country. He had a big announcement on coal yesterday, which involves putting more coal miners back to work. And these are all the things that union members and union membership had been shrinking for 30 years, felt abandoned from the Democratic Party on. That the Democratic Party was more interested in the EPA regulations, and then it became social issues, than it was about protecting manufacturing in this country. And what Trump has tapped into is that offended worker, aggrieved worker, whose mill closed and moved someplace else. And there's a lot of those folks. In my family, when I was a kid, were those folks, right? So I believe the capturing of that voter group for Trump, which was previously exclusively the Democratic Party's territory, how does the party recover from that when the actions Trump is taking right now with coal and with the tariffs is really something they look at as protecting and bringing back manufacturing jobs to America?
And that goes back to the question, what is a brand, Rob?
What is the brand?
What is the brand? Yeah, and it's a really good point. And, we have seen a huge demographic shift, in the Democratic Party, where it was a lot of the, white working class. It was the Democratic Party's base, through a lot of the history of the Democratic Party. And you're right. I think that with a lot of decisions, laws, regulations, that has slowly, been peeled away. And, you have a lot of college-educated folks now that vote Democrat. Obviously minorities, have always typically been in the Democratic Party camp. But that white working class has been lost to the Republican Party. And I think that, again, these are such complex issues for which there's not an easy prescription. And I do think that Bernie wing of the Democratic Party was able to speak to those voters. And there was a lot of crossover in 2016 of people who supported Bernie Sanders because it was populist energy, right? It was, what can we do to help the working class when we feel the weight of, let's just call it, the system is crushing, the working class people. And, whether or not you agree with the prescriptions of Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, there's no denying that both of those individuals were able to speak to the same voting groups. And, they had different prescriptions for how to go about it. But, when we talk about those figures compared to the establishment Democrat and Republican Party figures that have traditionally been who's run the parties, they were able to do that much more effectively. And so Trump won that, and I think he won that on the backs of, white working class voters. And, he leaned into issues that they felt were important, and they thought that he could fix some of those issues. Now, I don't think he's the right person for the job, and I think we're going to see a lot, in these next coming months, years, that are not going to benefit that group. But I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't say that for sure. I hope that's not the case, but it just feels like that's where we're headed. And I think that, it comes back to people, who you surround yourself with, right? Who has Trump surrounded himself with in the cabinet? The folks there are not people that, come from working class roots or, are looking, like, from their career standpoints, have looked out for the working class. They're the opposite. And so whether or not Trump, feels differently than all of them, he has surrounded himself with people that don't make those decisions in in the interest of the working class. So I don't know if that answered your question, Rob, but I do agree with you.
I
that
got you.
The Democrats, have some, they have some work to do on how to recapture that group's trust.
Just before you go, Maria or Bill, after the election, I read an income breakdown of who voted for Trump versus who voted for Democrats. Trump captured the $30,000 to $100,000 household income group significantly. He lost every other economic breakdown, under 30, over 100, but 30 to 100 captured it overwhelmingly. Maria.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. What happened, Aneesh, to those blue dog Democrats? I mean,
They became Republicans.
They absolutely did. And like Rob, I had coal miner grandfathers, uncles, the whole 9 yards. My father was a factory worker, also a card-carrying union member, and I see, like Rob, that that change in my family members, my relatives, because they were just completely dissatisfied. That's all there was to it. So,
Bill, go right ahead.
Yeah,
Before you go, Aneesh, Bill has a comment too.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a fine line. You mentioned Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is certainly the hope of a segment of the Democratic Party. But the image of socialism turned a lot of people off. So there was, except for that small percent of folks that would be supportive of Bernie Sanders, in net, I think he was a detractor. And the Democratic Party hitched their wagon to Bernie Sanders, I think, for far too long, and that is one of the impediments they got to get past. And this comes back to the branding. Right now, the Democratic Party is viewed as a socialistic party. You don't agree with that. I don't agree with that, but a lot of people think of it that way.
1 minute to go. Aneesh, final words are yours.
Yeah, and I was going to say, both great points, Maria and Bill, that, the folks, and I'm not one of those people, so I'm not here to preach, but I think that the folks who did vote for Trump, they knew what they were going to get out of, your generic Democrat or your generic Republican establishment person, right, if they were in office. They just want a wild card. What can Trump do that might shake things up in their favor, from a working class perspective? And I think that's, for me, as I've thought through this for years, I think that's what the allure of Trump is. Like, he is doing things so outside of the realms of what has ordinarily happened that people are just, waiting to see how things shake out. And I think that's what we see what's going on with the tariff situation. You have a lot of people who are, MAGA Republicans who are behind Trump, 100% of the way, and I see people, twisting themselves into pretzels trying to explain what's happening with the markets and, how this is good, and but I just don't agree. I just don't agree. If you have a plan to bring manufacturing back to the United States, that plan has to be laid out first, and then we use targeted tariffs to, pressure people into bringing their business back to the United States. The labor cost here.
On that note,
go
I got to get going. Aneesh, I appreciate your time this morning. Great to catch up with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Have
Bye.
a great day. Aneesh Sompalli, appreciate his participation this morning. We are back with more after these.